The Hobgoblin is an interesting Spider-Man villain that, believe it or not, is quite a bit different to the Green Goblin. Now, Sam Raimi seemingly wanted to use him at some point in the future, as he made a point of showing off a silver version of the Green Goblin mask in Spider-Man 3 that many fans believe was meant to be a reference to the Hobgoblin, who up until now we still haven't seen in the movies. But what if we did? What if the Hobgoblin was in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies? So now in Spider-Man 1, we actually don't see too much of Roderick Kingsley. We hear about him from J. Jonah Jameson, who makes a brief mention about his fashion empire, and Roderick himself does make an appearance at the World Unity Festival, where we get a shot of him looking more than a little impressed with the Green Goblin. Now, somehow by movie's end, Spider-Man hopes to hide the evidence of Norman being the Green Goblin in order to fulfill his promise to Norman to keep it a secret. But he finds that the suit has already been stolen, but he doesn't know it's been stolen by Roderick, and I don't know how he would find out, but he finds out that Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin and steals his suit. So now, in between the events of Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, we actually see Roderick unearthing Norman's corpse, and he actually uses his blood to recreate the Goblin formula. He tests it out on one of his own lackeys, who indeed develops greater strength but no insanity this time around. He perfected the formula. So now the lackey actually holds his own against Spider-Man, but is still defeated by him, of course. Now Kingsley actually has the lackey killed in prison in order to avoid having things tied back to him. He then decides to use his fashion background to design himself a new version of the Goblin suit, and uses the Goblin formula on himself, thus becoming the Hobgoblin. So now we begin Spider-Man 2 properly with Peter trying to get Joe's 29-minute guaranteed pizza delivered on time, because Joe's 29-minute guarantee is a promise, man, when he's forced to change into his Spider-Man outfit in order to make better time. Now, of course, this just has to be when he gets attacked by the Hobgoblin, and the pair get into a fight that's pretty evenly matched, actually. Spider-Man has been absolutely exhausted lately, and he's only operating at about 50%. Plus, the Hobgoblin formula is much stronger than that of the Green Goblin formula, and in the end, experience trumps strength, and Hobgoblin is sent running, but Peter still delivers the pizza late. We later see Peter actually makes it to his college class, but only makes it to the classroom as the students are beginning to clear out, of course. Now we see a student named Ned Leeds pass Peter by, and Ned leans over and tells him that he doesn't know how many chances he thinks Dr. Connors can give him. So now we actually see Peter and Ned are friends now. This is important for later on. Now speaking of later, we then see Ned attending Peter's birthday party, and he and Harry Osborn don't really get along very well. Harry already feels like Peter's been dodging him, and now he feels like he's being replaced, which is just the most fun feeling in the world. Meanwhile, we cut back to Roderick running his fashion business, and we see that he's not doing very well lately. You see, Narda Ravana, his competitor, has been doing a lot better than him, and it's made clear to us that this has to do with Roderick being the Hobgoblin. He's absentee from his own company, and I wanted to do this because I thought it'd be a cool kind of dark parallel. Peter's life in this movie is kind of ruined because he's Spider-Man, and so Roderick's life is kind of ruined because he's the Hobgoblin. So Roderick decides soon after that he wants to kill Ravana in order to save his company from bankruptcy. So now when Peter is forced to miss Mary Jane's play, instead of just being because of a random car chase, it's instead because of an attempted assassination on Ravana by the Hobgoblin. So now Peter is forced to be Spider-Man again, and this time the Hobgoblin does a lot better in their fight. He nearly beats Spider-Man this time, who's impatient and just wants to get to MJ's play. So Hobgoblin ends up having Spider-Man dead to rights, but his cockiness actually gets the better of him, and Peter is able to yank the cords out from the bottom of his glider. This sends him careening into the ocean, where he's assumed to be dead. And a big part of Peter's decision later on to quit being Spider-Man is that he actually feels responsible for killing the Hobgoblin. He feels like he doesn't want that burden anymore. However, we later learn that he did actually survive, of course, and it's decided that being the Hobgoblin isn't in his best interest. It's taking a physical and mental toll on him. So he decides to try manipulating somebody else to be the Hobgoblin instead. So he turns to Ned, who actually works as an intern at his company. Roderick ends up forcibly manipulating Ned into believing that he's been the Hobgoblin the entire time. So now Ned as the Hobgoblin successfully does what Roderick couldn't do. He kills Narda Ravana. And yes, I know she becomes the Belladonna in the comics. Believe me, I really, really wanted to include her as the Belladonna. But this movie is already so perfect without the Hobgoblin stuff. And adding the Hobgoblin stuff I already am worried is going to take away a little bit from the story. And I just think including the Belladonna on top of that would just be way too much. So I'm sorry, believe me, I really wanted to include her. But it's just a personal choice. I just think that would just take away from the story too much. So now if you're wondering how the Hobgoblin was able to kill her during this period when his predecessor wasn't able to, this is because this is when Spider-Man is still no more. So now Peter reads about this in the Daily Bugle, and he's shocked to learn that the Hobgoblin is still alive, or who he thinks has always been the Hobgoblin. And Peter feels this enormous weight lifting off of his shoulders, but he also feels more weight is added on to the pressure he feels to become Spider-Man again. Now he ends up, of course, still fighting Doc Ock on the train, and the whole third act remains the same until Doc Ock prepares to sink the fusion core into the water. That's, of course, when the Hobgoblin just has to show up and try to kill Spider-Man. So now Peter has to both protect Mary Jane and stop the Hobgoblin from accidentally screwing up Doc Ock's sacrificial mission. Now, in the end, Peter actually knocks his mask off, and Ned's identity is revealed. The old Ned returns, no longer under Roderick's influence, and he explains what happened to him, and who's really been behind all the Hobgoblin stuff. So then, when MJ is preparing for her wedding with John, Spider-Man whips into action against Roderick and sends him back into prison. So now we've made it to Spider-Man 3, and we see that Ned is fully recovered, luckily, from the events of the last movie. In fact, Peter's actually secured him a new job working at the Daily Bugle. Now, I know some of you are going to say, why wouldn't Peter have just arrested Ned? He was the Hobgoblin. But I would counter that with, he let the Sandman go, even though he confessed to murdering Uncle Ben, and Peter had no personal connection to him. Meanwhile, Ned is his friend, and he was only the Hobgoblin against his will, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I just think it's more realistic for Peter to let him go. So now we actually get a little cute romantic subplot between him and Betty Brant, who are really hitting things off in this movie. Now, our first real action sequence, instead of being Peter versus Harry, is actually Harry breaking Roderick out of prison. Because think about it, they both want Spider-Man dead, and Harry knows that he could use someone with experience fighting Spider-Man, which he didn't have in the actual movie because Green Goblin and Doc Ock were both dead. However, Roderick reiterates that he doesn't want to be the Hobgoblin anymore, but he agrees to train Harry on how to be the next Hobgoblin, because frankly, Harry should have never been called the new Goblin. What a terrible name in my opinion. So now Harry as the Hobgoblin fights Peter in the same sequence that we got, but we see Roderick is actually communicating with Harry through an earpiece and telling him what to do. In the end, however, Harry still hits his head and gets amnesia. Peter picks up the earpiece and he hears Roderick talking through it, asking if Harry's alright, and Peter just mutters Kingsley to himself. So now later on when Peter gets the symbiote, he not only goes after the Sandman, but also Roderick, because he manipulated both of his best friends against him, and for that Peter feels like he needs to pay. So we get an epic fight sequence between them over the streets of New York, and in the end, this is going to be really, really controversial, believe me, Spider-Man kills Roderick. And let me explain. First of all, I just think that if he survived, then the final battle would just become a little too overcrowded. Plus, I just think this would be a really cool way to show just what the suit has done to Peter, how bad it's made him turn out, that he's actually like killing both the Sandman, or so he thinks, but also the Hobgoblin, you know? I just think that that would be something that would really show how evil the suit has made him, honestly. And so now the rest of the movie goes the same, except that when Harry regains his memory, he goes back to being the Hobgoblin, and we never see him as the new Goblin. That doesn't happen because I really hate the new Goblin, I'm sorry. So did I make some pretty controversial decisions in this? Oh yeah, you betcha. Yeah, again, I want to reiterate, I apologize for not including the Belladonna. I know that's going to rub some people the wrong way, but I just think that there was already a lot going on in Spider-Man 2, and there was enough going on. And now to add the Hobgoblin to that, I already think is pushing it, but then you add in the subplot of the Belladonna, I just think it would be too much. I'm sorry. And I know that some people are going to say, oh, well, you include the Hobgoblin in Spider-Man 3, which already had a lot going on, but I tried to keep his involvement to a minimum. That's the main reason I killed the Hobgoblin off as soon as I did in Spider-Man 3. If you guys really want me to say what I think would happen if he survived to the final battle, then I think it would pretty much be the same, except that, you know, there would be an extra little subplot about, you know, the student versus mentor, you know, Harry versus Roderick. So, you know, that's basically the only change, as far as the final battle goes. Overall, though, I do think that, you know, having Roderick die halfway through would really show just how evil the symbiote has made Peter turn out. I'm sorry, I know some people are going to disagree with me on that, but I just, you know, everybody knew the Sandman was coming back because we didn't see a body, we just saw him melt into mud, you know what I mean? But if we actually see the Hobgoblin, like, dead, like properly dead, I think it'll really set in how bad this suit is making him. That's just a stylistic choice, I admit. You can do the story without it, but I just think it would be fitting, personally. Plus, 4 is a crowd. I already think 4 villains would be pushing it quite a bit, so I would rather just get Roderick out of the way as quickly as possible. I know some people are going to get really mad at me for that, but believe me when I say Spider-Man 3 is not an easy movie to fix, and I don't think adding the Hobgoblin would make it any better, personally. And if it did, it would only make it a little bit better. But yeah, I do think the Hobgoblin is a character that should absolutely be in the movies one day. It would be really cool if Ned became the Hobgoblin in a future Tom Holland, Spider-Man movie. I haven't seen No Way Home at the time of recording. Please don't spoil it for me. My state's doing really bad with COVID right now. Omicron is kicking my state's ass, so I haven't gotten the chance to see No Way Home yet. So I don't know what goes on with Ned in that movie, but I think it would be kind of interesting if they went that route, made him the Hobgoblin, or if they just brought in Roderick Kingsley. That would be really cool too. But I just think the Hobgoblin is a character too interesting to pass up eventually. Like, I think eventually the Hobgoblin needs to be in a Spider-Man movie. So that's just my personal opinion. Do I think his presence would have made this trilogy any better? No, personally. Like, I think the Hobgoblin's a cool character, but I really do think the Sam Raimi movies were well paced. Except for Spider-Man 3, of course. But, I think that ultimately, as far as the Hobgoblin goes, if they had just made Harry the Hobgoblin from the get-go, I think it would have been fine. He would have looked a lot cooler than he would have as the new Goblin, that's for damn sure. But yeah, overall, I know it's controversial, but I do think the Sam Raimi trilogy was probably better off without the Roderick Kingsley stuff. So yeah, I'm sure that a lot of you are going to disagree with me on that, but I love the Sam Raimi movies. I really do. Spider-Man 2 is my favorite Spider-Man movie to this day. Yes, I do think it's better than Into the Spider-Verse. Don't hate me. But yeah, so I mean, I was already worried about including the Hobgoblin because that's multiple villains is really going to overcrowd things. So I try to keep Roderick's storyline to a minimum in these movies. So forgive me about that. If there was like a full free Spider-Man movie with no other villain, then I'm sure I could do something different. But as far as including him in the official movies, this was as good as I could get without, ruining everything else going on, honestly. So yeah, forgive me if you guys don't like this. If you don't like it, please let me know all about it in the comments down below. I'd love to hear that. Also, if you like it, then tell me all about that as well, because I like to hear that even more for obvious reasons. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up, share with all of your friends on all your various social media platforms. And speaking of social media, don't forget to follow me at Rinzler_Productions on Instagram. This is my final video of 2021, so this is my early Happy New Year to all of my longtime viewers. I'm very happy to have done videos consistently every single day for this long, and I hope to continue doing that as far as I can into 2022. So yeah, also give me more what if recommendations in the comments down below, sorry, and I'll see all of you in 2022.